Have you ever wondered what it's like to bite into Nerds gummy clusters? They're fruity. They're tangy. They're gummy. And they're crunchy. Nerds Gummy Clusters, a union of fruity sweet gummy and tangy crunchy nerds. Unleash your senses. Shop now at nerdscandy.com.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase? List it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry. With me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. And as promised a couple of weeks ago now, in this episode, we're talking to someone who is at the heart of music industry politics, and indeed at the heart of the music industry and politics. It's Tom Kiehl, who is the CEO of UK Music, which is, how do we describe UK Music, Stuart? Trade body for the music business?
Yeah, it's kind of the umbrella body. So all the other ones sit underneath it, and it's the one that brings everyone together and lobbies for all of them. So publishing, labels, managers, artists, a lot.
So Tom's here to talk about some of the big issues facing the music industry, most of them in some way or other, which relate to money, as I say, in one way or other, including, well, we'll ask him about the ongoing debates around streaming and streaming royalties and the impact of AI and anything else that comes up. Tom, thank you very much for joining us on The Price of Music. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
For music fans who haven't come across UK Music, what is it and what's its mission statement?
Well, we're an umbrella body that aspires to bring the sector together to collaborate and champion and coordinate the industry, basically, really to get policy change in a number of areas. We bring together various component parts of the sector, whether that's the recorded sector, the publishing sector, music publishing sector, the creator organisations, and also the PROs like PRS and PPL. And we work very closely with the live sector too through an equivalent body called Live who do that work. So really we want to affect policy change, make sure that government and parliament are working on behalf of the sector. And there's many active issues at the moment where the sector wants to see progress on, particularly in light of the general election that we've just recently had and the opportunity there.
And what is a day in the life like as head of UK Music? What was on your desk or in your inbox this morning? What are you dealing with today?
Well, I think every day is different. Probably most jobs are probably like that, but it's at the moment we're in the midst of party conference season. So we've just come back from the Lib Dem conference in Brighton. They've had a big increase in number of MPs, and so a lot of key supporters there that we wanted to re-engage with. And we're now preparing to go off to Liverpool for Labour Party conference next week. So really, it's planning things. We do events, we do panels, we get people from industry, people from the political parties who have an interest within music to basically engage their parties on our topics and issues and hopefully get some progress and momentum. So today is very much about planning for that. And actually after this call, I've got to then go into town, and we have a meeting on AI with Chris Bryant, who's the culture minister and is equivalent in the IP department, the science department, called Ferrell Clark, and that's obviously a big issue, AI, and how the sector navigates that. And so we work with our members to get a common position on some of these topics, and through meetings, roundtables, we put our case to the government and hope that they're listening and hope they then take that forward in the policy discussions that they then administer.
And it's good you mentioned party conferences, because we were going to ask before we get into like nuts and bolts of the business about your background, because I'm right in thinking you worked around government for a number of years before crossing the floor to music.
Yeah, that's right. I'd started working in Parliament in 2001. It was about a week after 9/11, so that was a very strange time to sort of start working in politics. I'd always been very passionate about politics and music. They're kind of my twin passions. And over the course of working in Parliament and then a couple of years in the government period during the coalition government, I really kind of tried to find ways to get music related issues in the political sphere. One of the big issues I worked on was around 2007, 2008 was around live music and trying to make sure local authorities were putting on events, venues and musicians were able to put on events without red tape and bureaucracy. And eventually, during the coalition government, we actually achieved a piece of legislation, a private member's bill that I helped pioneer called the Live Music Act, and that deregulated live music performance. And that gave me a really good insight into the music industry. Some of the issues it faces, some of the complexities around the number of kind of different opinions that the sector has, but also then trying to achieve change for the sector and make sure that the political process can actually help and support music rather than hinder it. And so that was kind of my segue in. I left working for the Liberal Democrats, as I was working at the time. I left working with them in 2012, and then an opportunity came up at UK Music just as Fergal Sharkey, who was our original CEO, was leaving, and then I was lucky enough to get that opportunity and help take the organisation forward ever since.
So, is it a good time to have taken over as CEO? I mean, is when you look across the musical landscape and at the economic health of the UK music industry, what's doing well and what's behind that?
Sure. I think there's always the phrase that sometimes people use about lucky generals as to whether you take on a leadership role in a period of good times and bad times, and often it's how you then respond to it. I think the current situation at the moment with the music industry, there's some success in the UK, and we do annual reports which highlight that economic success, the 6.7 billion contribution that the core music industry contributes is something which we seek to celebrate. And there's a lot of really good work that's going on to support that. Unfortunately, sort of underneath that, there are some big challenges, and then some of them are consequences of the political process, particularly things like music education and talent. We've had an issue around the last 10, 12 years of the basically curriculum narrowing and not valuing creative subjects. So are we really ensuring that we can develop the talent of tomorrow in the current process? But also things like EU touring, which is the Brexit consequences, and around live sector, there's a big active debate about venues and the grassroots structure, and organisations like Music Venue Trust do great campaigning work in that regard, and Live is trying to bring those organisations together as well on some of those matters. So it's a very active time, busy time. But as I said, I think the industry's always had challenges. I think actually the one thing at the moment which is potentially really exciting is we do have a new government. So that's an opportunity to reset the conversation with them. You get used to, and it's not a party political point. You get used to working with a political party in government of a certain colour over a period of time, and you get used to a way of working, and you probably think, well, we had this meeting, a similar topic a couple of years ago, and we're not going to necessarily make progress here. So there is definitely a real groundswell of a feeling of opportunity, and actually that's probably an issue for the new government too, to manage those expectations. But yeah, my job is where the politics and music collides, and I think we hopefully will see some progress in the coming months.
What do you make of the new government, the dealings you've had with them so far? Because it strikes me from my position as chair of Live that they are very engaged and seem to have brought with them people who understand and are very interested in music. There was a debate the other day about the Oasis ticketing situation. There was an adjournment debate where it transpired that at least two MPs had been in the queue for Oasis tickets. So there are music fans there, and I don't know if this is going to help you on the way.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's a lot of interest, and that is great credit to a lot of the good work that UK Music and its members have done over the years in kind of cultivating the relationships. We run something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group, which brings together cross-party MPs from Labour, Conservatives, Liberal Democrat, SNP. They disagree on lots of things once they're in the House, but those who have a passion for music, we can really bring them together and support the sector. So the new government has some really interesting appointments. Chris Bryant, who's the Minister for Culture, has somebody who has very strong views about the music industry and the creative industries more generally, and it's seen as a very good advocate for the sector. So I think he's going to do really well too. Lisa Nandy's the new Secretary of State. We've done some work with her in the past in terms of local approaches to music, and she's a good constituency MP in Wigan, and we've done some work there. So I definitely think there's a big opportunity there, and it's really funny you mentioned the Oasis tickets issue, because it is really it's I think it's one of those kind of moments where the country kind of came together actually in that shared experience. Everyone's kind of got a story about where you were in the queue and whether you got tickets or not, and MPs, a lot of them were in the queue, and a lot of them are quite unhappy, unfortunately, about the experience they had, and so that does have consequences for the industry and bodies like us about how we then respond to it and make sure that at the end of the day, music fans are supported and protected. So yeah, a lot of issues for us to take away, but certainly our post bag is very much likely to increase rather than decrease, I think, in the coming months.
And is there kind of a line you walk when you're talking to politicians, in that I guess you have to say, this is a big, important industry, look how it's growing, look at the positive stuff and its economic impact. But like you said, you're also trying to stress it's not all fine. There's challenges we'd like help with. Like, you don't want them thinking everything's brilliant, we don't need to do anything, do you? Is that kind of a line you walk when you're discussing?
Definitely. I sometimes describe it as a bit of a tap dance. I mean, we're definitely, or you're kind of walking the tightrope, because you don't want to be sound too negative, because at the end of the day, government wants to battle. Political parties want to back successful industries or ones that they feel there's potential. So if you're too doom and gloom about everything, then you may not get anywhere. But at the same time, if you're too positive, then the government may say, well, why should we intervene? What you're kind of doing all right for yourself too. So it is a delicate balancing act too. And I think certainly there is success in the industry, undoubtedly, but certainly on the kind of grassroots level, there's a number of issues which need to be taken forward. And so, particularly in recent years, when we've kind of got a better understanding of some of the challenges that the sector faces, that has really helped us kind of articulate that kind of balance.
One recent example of that was you did the music tourism report, which I know had a lot of really positive figures about. I think it was Beyonce and Blur, the twin titans of tourism in the UK, and also Harry Styles. But then I think even in there, you were saying music tourism is a really good thing for the UK, lots of numbers, but then talking about the problems for grassroots venues and the cost of touring crisis. So is that a good example of where you're putting out some research that does straddle both those, the challenges, but also the kind of the good stuff?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also with that piece of work and actually research and data generally, that's really important to us, because I think MPs like having data. They like, say, talking about their local areas and communities, and that particular report is very delineated around that, what is going on within the localities. So it's that certainly helps us, that piece of work being framed in that way.
Data is key, isn't it? It always comes up in our meetings. There is nothing that, as you say, politicians love better than sifting through data. You have to hand them figures so they've got an easy go-to, so they can simply say, if you do X, you get X. They love data. Love it.
I do, yeah. I mean, if anything, I mean, I think before UK Music existed, I think there was this phrase that sometimes was used about music industries, about lobbynomics, about whether there was, how verifiable was the data and things like that. So I think what we've created is almost like a sort of safe place that the industry can work together. You can get people like BPI and PRS and MPA and MU kind of working together on data and collaboratively. And actually, it means that UK Music, when it actually makes these statements about data, that you kind of got the sector buy-in. I mean, that's one of the big things about us as an organisation. I think we certainly helped grow that credibility with government before we existed. And so we were still a relatively new organisation. We were set up in 2008. There was a perception that the industry was a little bit all over the place and there wasn't that kind of coordinated focus. So I obviously there's been many 3 or 4 CEOs before me, and I obviously I've helped support that. But I think it's definitely a journey that the organisation has been on.
Mm-hmm. Was it quite nice putting out that kind of report that covered 2023 and thinking, right, well, if we do this next year, that's going to have Taylor Swift in it. And then 2025 is going to have a race. Like, it feels like there's these big things coming up as well. So that when you think about this report is a snapshot of last year, but this year has been pretty good in that sense, the big stadium gigs and tourism revenues.
Definitely. I think, and obviously in particular, obviously don't want to hark back too much to the recent past, but the pandemic was obviously a very challenging time for everyone. And it's nice to have some really positive stories coming out of the industry now about that growth in live and people returning to events. And if you even wasn't that long ago when we were still sort of sitting in our rooms and whether we'd ever be going to shows again. So it's nice to kind of see that in that wider context, I feel.
I think we have to get on to one of the key issues, because I can tell Stuart is straining at the leash to talk about, well, where should we start? And when it comes to some of the challenges going forward, and the conversations that are being had that are key to the music industry as it evolves, we have to deal with streaming, I guess, for start. Do we, Stuart? What are you saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing I'm interested in asking you about, I think, Tom, is because you are the umbrella body. So you have the people, the labels, you have the people who kind of have been fighting quite publicly over a lot of this stuff. And I guess you're the umbrella body who has them all in the room for regular meetings, seeing what they're doing behind the scenes. Because I know some people. So what are you seeing? What's your take on like progress in terms of reform? And is there a path to kind of compromise between, I don't know, for example, labels on one side and managers and artists on the other? Because I think you probably have a good sense of what they're really doing when they've kind of put away the press sound bites and
sure.
in private.
Yeah, no, I mean, these kind of issues have always, since I've been joined in 2012, these issues have always kind of been bubbling under the surface. And I think that it really came out in again back in the pandemic, and that certainly that early part when people did not know what was going to kind of happen next. And Tom Gray, who did sit on our board and still is the IVA's chair, he obviously launched the Broken Record campaign, and that was a very impactful campaign, and it got people waking up to some of these issues in a more defined way. And there was select committee inquiries and various work going on. UK Music did engage with that, and said, as you're absolutely right, it's a complex issue for us, given that we represent both the creator organisations but also the business side of things too, and that is essentially where that debate was at between the two. But we did put in submissions too, and on the generalities of where you can align on the importance of things like copyright and IP, which at the end of the day is what it kind of boils down to, and the fact that should be respected and enforced. It was harder for us to actually get involved in the actual discussions because we couldn't really take a position which would compromise one member or the other. But we provided a facilitating role. Most of my colleagues have some level of political experience, and actually you had the very high profile public inquiry into the music industry, and a lot of our board members had never given appearances before select committees before. So we helped, even if we weren't taking defined positions, we helped navigate them as to how they would maybe approach and tackle that. And I think that helped give a good account of our various members' opinion, that we were able to kind of enable them to do that work. I mean, obviously now, since that inquiry a few years ago, there's been quite a lot of subsequent work on music streaming, which the government has coordinated. And again, we are part of those various working groups. There's been some progress on things like metadata, and again, it all goes back to data, Steve, metadata and the identifiers and how that works, and also on transparency. So there's definitely good things that come out of that process, and I think people are engaging with it constructively. I mean, the interesting thing is now that I think there was a meeting which actually was on the day of the election was called back in May. There's only been one subsequent meeting of the government working group since then, which I wasn't unfortunately able to attend. So it's an interesting thing now with that change of government, whether they were happy to facilitate that process. The previous government, will you get a more defined approach from the government? I said the previous one probably was happy to facilitate discussions, but not come down on one particular angle. I guess the big question now is there isn't a manifesto pledge from Labour on these issues, but will they continue to take a similar approach, or will they be more definite?
And one of the sort of feelings I've got since the streaming inquiry was we've had these working groups set up, and I guess we only hear about it when people are complaining. But one of the sense I get is that some artists and managers are frustrated that nothing really has happened yet. There wasn't any legislation. It took a long time to set up a working group on remuneration, actually how the money's paid out. And sometimes I get a sense of that frustration that we had this big inquiry. It felt like a big moment, but has the momentum ebbed away. But then I also wonder, perhaps that's because there's constructed conversations that no one's talking about. People only complain in public, but they don't talk about where they have found compromise and work together. Is that kind of a fair guess from the outside?
I guess each member and each individual involved in that process will have their own particular take, and obviously the speed that they would be expecting to go at with this particularly important matter. I mean, I don't, in some ways, because it, as you say, the group only really got set up towards the end of a particular parliament, that makes it quite difficult to really then legislate for, because you essentially run out of time. There was Kevin Brennan, who was a former MP who did a lot of great work on this. He had a private member's bill on this matter too, and that got a lot of focus for a period of time, but then that moment passed too as well. So I guess it's each individual in these situations. I mean, politics is, and the policy process, it can be quite a slow burning process too. It can take a while for compromise to come and change, and to actually see changes. I think that's the issue. And again, we probably saw that in the pandemic, where in many ways the government wasn't quite well equipped, certainly in those early stages, to really fully understand the complexities of the live music industry, or how it kind of operates, and why something like lockdown would have caused such a substantial issue for it. And eventually that got things like cultural recovery funds set up. So, but I think that inherently there's an education piece there about the music industry, and the government needs to kind of go on as to help support the sector.
With Amex Platinum, you can really be in the now. Access to Resi Priority Notify. Yes. 4 p.m. checkout with fine hotels and resorts booked through Amex Travel.
We needed this.
And dedicated card member entrances at select events.
Let's go!
Means you can focus on the present moment. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex. Card member entrance access not limited to Amex Platinum Card.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase? List it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
Just out of interest, I mean, how much does government's attitude change? Whether, I suppose, in respect of whether a story is in the news at that certain point, because I think as the streaming debate, as the select committee was taking place, and people were sending around links of it, and you see, reasonably famous musicians.
That was my lockdown viewing.
Yeah. Well, you had all these musicians giving evidence, and for a while, and it was a big talking point, and it was sort of in the news, and it felt for a while. And I'm certainly sure some of the musicians or the managers were thinking, we've got the record labels on the ropes here. We've got the streaming organisations organisations, the streaming providers, and the big record labels on the ropes, and it's a big public debate. But when it goes away, when it's not, as I say, it's not essential, not in the news. Does everyone take their foot off the gas, or is Stuart saying, is there stuff still going on?
I think there's still, definitely there's stuff going on. I think people, just because if you're not hearing it in the news, I mean, there's a lot of planning that goes into various campaigns, and there are good times to be making particular points, and then obviously recognizing that there are other opportunities and taking things otherwise. So I think what you've kind of seen over the last, particularly around those issues, is a more public awareness, I think, of the importance of politics and how it can play a part in the music industry. And I think coupled with that, you had a grassroots music venue or grassroots inquiry from the CMS committee as well towards the end of the last parliament as well. And people like MVT and Live have obviously been all over that inquiry. So it's almost never been a more interesting time, I think, actually, to be kind of working in that kind of politics and music segment, if you like, because I do think that the issues are very ripe, and I think the voices of everyone's kind of getting much more organised, whether it is a record company or a music venue or the live sector. Everyone's kind of really feels the importance now, and obviously UK music can play a really important role in that as the kind of a core sector body coordinating the sector.
I mean, you mentioned AI already, when we were really keen to talk about that. And one of the ways into that, before we get onto the detail of what you would like to see happen, is this idea of, we're still having some of these streaming debates. There's still some divides there. But with AI, I feel like what we're hearing is that it's very important for the industry to be unified on that, to go to government and say, right, AI is a big new thing. Here's what we want. Has that been an important or challenging task for you to kind of, while some of those streaming divides are still quite fresh, to be say, right, but now we need to get together and agree what we think about AI now, because that's going to be pressing. Like, is that without you coming down on one side or the other, is that one of your key tasks, is when everyone has been fighting like cats and dogs, when something comes along that requires them to get together and be united, is that what UK music's task is?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I mean, weirdly, it may got less attention than probably the streaming inquiry, but alongside the streaming inquiry, the previous government, proposed a really, what we saw would have been a very damaging change to the law with regarding AI, and would have actually weakened copyright substantially. That was 2 years ago. In the industry, even though they had these arguments ongoing about streaming, the industry did come together in opposition to that proposal. It was called a text and data mining. Again, Steve, back to data. It comes up, a text and data mining exception for copyright, a very technical piece, legislative change, but it would have had quite profound impact. And the sector did come together. We opposed it collectively, and then eventually the government of the day then saw that wasn't the right way to go down. So I think certainly we need to find those areas of alignment. I think the issue with AI, it's we're learning about AI all the time, and there's so much that we're kind of uncovering, that we're constantly having to sort of develop our policy position. We've got principles that we've kind of established, but then the more you kind of scratch the surface with AI and think about the actual consequences and where this could all end up, you then think of other angles and approaches. And I think it's one what we've had to put a lot of work on and have a very defined, tight sort of work program as to how we kind of work on AI to make sure that we can respond to politicians in terms of what they want to understand where the industry is at, but also make sure that debate is done in a constructive way with the sector, and we don't kind of compromise this in the process.
I mean, is it fair? I mean, so here's where I, an idiot, summarizes what the music industry thinks, and you tell me, no, that's not quite right. But is where we're at now, I guess, the music industry saying, right, if you're an AI company doing musical AI, you can't train it on our work without asking permission and paying us and being transparent about how it's working. And is the issue that some AI companies, we've talked about a few lawsuits, are saying, we don't have to do that. We can just train on everything. You can't stop us. And when I think about what is the law on this, the law is kind of, there is no law yet, or we're not sure how existing copyright laws apply to it. So no one quite knows whether it is legal or not. and someone has to settle that. Is that kind of a fair nutshell summary?
Yeah, no, I think you've summarised the debate very, very well. I mean, the basic position of our members would be that the copyright, we feel that the law is clear, but also, maybe that needs to be restated, and obviously, getting the government to actually reaffirm that would be important. I mean, the issue with AI as well is that the government sees that there's potential big societal benefits away from the music industry, but the risk is that they might make changes which then cause problems for us as a sector without thinking about the wider impact on AI. But no, I think you summarised where the kind of debate is very, very well. I mean, we kind of essentially, one of the main things that we've been calling for is greater protections, and that's on transparency and making sure that the AI firms can inform us and notify us what actually will have more of a clear duty as to actually the content that's being ingested by these so-called large language models, and that having greater protections in that respect would be important. Another area that's been thought about is around personality rights and whether the regime in the UK is as strong as it is in other places, and there are certain various. There was I think in America it's called the No Fakes Act, which a lot of the industries come behind. In America has been introduced to tighten things. So we need to work out whether we've got similar protections there, or whether we need need to have further strengthening.
It seems like, I mean, I guess, like you say, the music industry having to learn about AI very fast. I guess some of those AI companies are having to learn about music rights very fast, which is as daunting. And I imagine the politicians in the middle, I don't know if there are any politicians who are both AI and music rights experts. So I guess they're having to grasp these issues too. And everyone is trying to figure out what needs to be done. It feels like, I mean, it's fascinating, but also slightly terrifying, I guess, in terms of getting the right stuff in place.
Yeah, no, we did a little inquiry with our all-party parliamentary group at the beginning of this year on this very issue, partly as a means to trying to sort of engage the music-focused MPs and peers in some of these topics, and we got some specialists in. People are developing what we would see as positive AI examples to talk to them, and that report did have several recommendations that will be interesting to see whether we can keep the momentum of that engaging on those topics. I mean, it is technical, and that's the issue with us. We have to sometimes try to find some of the make some of these kind of quite technical concepts like copyright tangible in a way that MPs can understand. And at the end of the day, it's about payment and fair pay and making sure people are treated fairly. And I think that's the way we can make those connections.
The strange thing here is, sorry, it just occurs to me that a lot of the things that we would like to see happen, there's a feeling that we need to do something. The music industry needs to do something about AI and have a line on AI. There needs to be some kind of legislation, and that's reasonably urgent. Governments don't tend to work to other people's urgency. They work in their own way, and it sometimes happens quite slowly. And I guess part of that, we've mentioned the streaming select committee, but if governments, the wheels are slowly turning, but 3 years on and not much has happened, creates a new level of frustration amongst managers and musicians. Even if something is happening, it's not happening quick enough. And so when then AI comes along, it's like, well, nothing happened with streaming, so we're going to take, we're not going to help you out with AI because we didn't get anywhere with streaming. Do you see what I mean? Because it's all taking so long.
Yeah, no, I see your point, and I think there's definitely an urgency to some of these matters, and navigating things that are very, very complex, and it's industry and the political process. Are they both kind of sufficiently focused in that? And it's something we all kind of collectively need to work on. And I certainly trying to get that expert input into AI is something where we are focusing a lot at the moment.
I mean, one last AI question. You mentioned this, actually getting companies in to talk to the parliamentary group. Is that something that's quite important for the music industry to talk about the good stuff and the potential of it? Because I feel like sometimes these twin fears of AI companies trading on our work without asking us, and then deepfakes of artists, could make everyone just see this as purely a terrible sort of existential threat. But it feels like there's a lot of good, exciting, possibly industry changing things in a positive way happening with AI. And is that something that UK music is trying hard to do as well? Like not just to
Yeah.
say these are the problems, but
No, definitely the balance. There's definitely a balanced approach to this, and there are a lot of artists who do use AI in a positive way and enable to enhance their creativity. But also, it actually helps with a lot of efficiencies within the industry too, whether that's royalty collection or copyright infringement and those kind of topics. So there's definitely a positive side to AI. But so that, again, we need to get that balance right between not kind of being too end of the world scenario about it, but at the same time recognizing there are substantial changes that need to be made.
I mentioned earlier on about your inbox and what's on your desk. So streaming is still a major debate. AI is something which will have to be dealt with, but at the same time, there are other issues, long-term issues, which I guess you're also having to make time for, because we've got to be thinking. I imagine you're thinking about diversity in the music industry, sustainability will be another big question. You have to forward plan all these other big topics as well.
Yeah. I mean, we did a manifesto for the general election, and that ended up having about 10 chapters in it and 31 asks, and that's probably the nature of being a collective body for a variety of opinions. Obviously, we were never going to get all of that into the manifestos, but that does range from things like, as you say, like equality and freelancers and making sure that they're treated fairly and making sure they got protections in place, because there isn't necessarily, the law doesn't always work for them in that regard. But we've done a lot of work as well in recent years around what's called the power of music, and actually that beyond the kind of economics, the health and well-being area and social prescribing, and that being a kind of solution that can be an alternative to treatments. And we got a very receptive audience from the previous government on that area. So our inbox is broad and vast. It's a question of prioritization, though, and we do need to prioritize, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get anywhere on 30 different issues. We just have to find ways to be neat and get those points across.
And it's a next generation as well. You were mentioning education, music education, and music having a place in education and being accessible to people. That's also key to, well, what will come when we've all retired.
Yes, the talent pipeline is sometimes is a phrase that people like, and some people that don't like the idea of the industry being a pipeline. But it's essentially, there've been a lot of concerns over recent years about less people doing GCSEs, less people doing A levels. What does that mean in practice? Less music teachers as well. A substantial change there. The new government has been elected on a basis of that they're going to create 6,500 new teachers. So how many of those are going to be music teachers? And the previous government did have a very narrow approach to the curriculum and emphasised the traditional subjects and less so the creative subjects and the creative arts. Then one of the first things that the new education department has done is actually to say that they do want to have a curriculum review, and have spoken very positively about culture in that regard, because it's really important to the sector at the end of the day, that if we want to create talent of the future, and that could be the artist's talent, but also talent behind the scenes too, having that at a very early years point, and then beyond that, having music so much part of your life in a school or curriculum setting is really key. And this is, I think, it's one of the areas where I think probably the industry can be really united on, but also one where I think there is reason to be quite optimistic that we will see a change of approach from the government on this, which will hopefully have dividends for us in years to come.
Mm.
I know we're all biased here, but I mean, it always boggles me when music is treated like that, because I feel like there's so many good things about music being part of your school life, even if you're not going to be a professional musician, like the kind of the benefits, the cultural well-being benefits. But then there is an industry, like you say, there is going to be an economic benefit of having music at an early age. But maybe I'm just not seeing the other side, but it does seem like a really short-sighted strategy to have taken, to have not thought it was worth investing in.
Yeah, no, quite. And I think, I do feel that it's somewhere where there's room for optimism, and we'll see what happens next.
I've got one last question, which has nothing to do with money or the price of music. I would like to know, Tom, what's the most interesting or bizarre place you have found yourself invited to in your roles at UK Music? Where have you ended
God.
up?
Ronnie Scott's? No. Oh, no, that's not. That shouldn't be bizarre, should it? God, that's a.
Because I see invites flying around, to American embassy parties and all sorts of. You end up standing next to people. That's the other thing, I guess. Have you in your role, have you met some of your musical heroes that you never thought you would?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I mean that's one of the great privileges of the job, is that there's a way of engaging musicians in our work. We did a couple of years ago. We did a big campaign against some of the things that YouTube and Google were doing. That ended up we did a big event outside, kind of stunt outside Google HQ to try to get kind of show the value of music and the fact that like a busking group would get more money than they were getting out of YouTube and Google at the time. A part that was assembled by Crispin Hunt, who's obviously former Long Pigs lead singer and very key person, a lot of boards, but he assembled a kind of Britpop masterclass team. So Brett Anderson turned up for that too, and obviously Suede were a very informative band to me in my youth, and so meeting him in that context was fantastic. So I think there's kind of the job is very varied. You get to experience you get to meet lots of really interesting people, both from politics and from music. And yeah, it's a fantastic place to work, and to work for a sector which you're passionate about and feel you can make a difference in is really important to me.
I think that's a great summing up, I think, and a good place to leave it. Thank you very much for your time, Tom, and do keep in touch. And if you've got any big stories, any announcements to make, you know where we are.
Will do. Thank you so much.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride or die stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Jira. Jira is the only project management tool you need to plan and track work across any team. So if you're a team of developers, Jira better connects you with teams like marketing and design, so you have all the information you need in one place. Plus, their AI helps you knock out the small stuff so you can focus on delivering your best work. Get started on your next big idea today in Jira.
Tom Kiehl from UK Music, and I mean that's quite eye-opening, isn't it? There were a lot of things which I hadn't really thought about, because particularly that point about government moves at a completely different speed to everyone else. However much we want, we need things done in the music industry for the benefit of particularly artists. I think at the moment, you're not going to get overnight change. But lobbying is about just having conversations after conversation after conversation.
Yeah, and it just struck me how much of a diplomat you have to be, because not only has he got to be able to do instantly, like suddenly you work with the Conservative government 14 years, suddenly Labour's in power, switch to that, but also to be the person who's got, when everyone has been fighting in public in the music industry and shouting at each other about streaming or whatever, and then you're the person who has to get them all in the room and say, right, we need to agree on some stuff because we're going to lobby politicians tomorrow. So yeah, it's a real diplomat's job. Well, probably something you're seeing in life as well. You have to be able to balance everyone's interests and then kind of come up with some strong arguments that politicians will listen to. It's a skill, I think.
Thanks again to Tom, and thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed the show, and we hope you have, as I always say, please do subscribe in your podcast app and give us a review and a rating, or maybe a mention on social media. It would be nice. It all helps us build a following, which we can then use to start debates and pass on some useful tips. And if you're lucky, there might be one or two gags or salacious anecdotes along the way as well. You'll find our social media links, by the way, online. And of course, if you have a question as well, which you'd like answered on the show, and we will get to a listener's question special sooner rather than later, but email us with any of your financial music industry inquiries. It's thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. And finally, if you'd like to support the show with your loose change, we now have a Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. Join us again next week. Till then, take care, everybody. Cheerio.